and reading from the book of Revelations given to the elder John. Reading from the 12th chapter, the first 6 verses. This is rather strange reading when you first start, so bear with me. I'll explain some of it later in the sermon. A great portent appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pangs, in the agony of giving birth. Then another portent appeared in heaven, a great red dragon, with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems on his head. His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. Then the dragon stood before the woman who was about to bear a child, so that he might devour her child as soon as it was born. And she gave birth to a son, a male child, who was to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was snatched away and taken to God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, so that there she can be nourished for 1,260 days. This is the word of the Lord. Let's start by listening once again to the psalmist who cries out, "Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord. O Lord, hear my voice." Well, haven't we all been sometime or other in that place of despair and discouragement, wondering if indeed God is there? And is God listening? A family waits for a word from the doctor. What do the tests show? And how bad will it be? Will my marriage survive this crisis? They're making cuts at work. Will I still have a job? And what will happen if I do not? My heart is broken, and I don't think I'll ever get over this loss. On it goes. Think of your own depths, your own times of despair, of waiting, of wanting to know, but afraid to know. The psalmist has been there ahead of you, as has the church that John addresses in Revelation. When I was a pastor at Concord, the high school class wanted to study Revelation. Well, their teacher came to me feeling like, oh, what am I going to do? So I said, sure, I'll teach. I love Revelation. So I started with the kids and I said, it's written in code. Well, they were bright kids. I said to them, why do you suppose they did that? And they were bright kids and they could figure out pretty quickly that you write in code when it's too dangerous to say straight out what you really mean. And this particular code sounds like dreams, like stories. There are often allusions to earlier biblical events. The folk reading it knew the code, but the Romans who posed the danger did not. And they did pose a danger. The restrictions put on Christian businesses was endangering their ability to make a living. And even more, they were being put to a test. Just offer a pinch of incense to the emperor, which made them choose between their faith and their lives. It was a dangerous time, and folk were dying. What will get them through? The revelations given to John are Jesus' way of getting them through. What I just read to you is Christmas and Easter all rolled up in one short paragraph. The woman, Mary, maybe the church, gives birth to a male child who's to rule all the nations. Well, who's the child? Jesus. You got it. And when evil, the dragon, comes after him, think the cross, he's snatched up to heaven, which is what? Resurrection, where he waits, like the woman, this time probably the church again. The woman waits here on earth. She waits for 1,260 days. Well, what is that talking about? At this point, it pays to know a little bit of Jewish history. About 200 years before Jesus was born, the Holy Land was ruled by a man named Antiochus Epiphanes. And he demanded that he would be worshipped as a god. And he sought to impose Hellenistic culture on the Jews. He forbade them to be circumcised. He set up an altar to the Olympian Zeus in the temple. And he sacrificed swine on his altar. Do you imagine how repulsive and degrading that was to the Jews? It was a desperate period in Israel's history, but it wasn't one that went on forever. A family surnamed the Maccabees, you've heard of Judas Maccabeus, they led a revolt against him and established a measure of independence for Israel. So John will often use the 1,260 days, or a 3.5-year period, as a way of reminding his churches that this present period of persecution will come to an end, even as it did in the time of Antiochus. This suffering will not go on forever. And even more, it reminds his readers then and now that God is still in charge of the world. Even when things look dark and hopeless, God is still in charge. Now, saying that is one thing, but believing it is another. Do any of you remember that several years ago, Rabbi Kushner wrote a book called When Bad Things Happen to Good People? But it was so often misquoted as Why Bad Things Happen to Good People. You see, that's the question we all want answered. Why do bad things happen to good people? If our good and loving God is truly in charge of the world, why is there so much pain and so much suffering? And my short answer to that, at least in part, is we live in the waiting time. We live in the time when God's victory over evil is assured, but not yet complete. Let me give you an example. Many historians will tell you that the event that determined the defeat of Hitler's awful regime was the attack on Pearl Harbor. How many years ago? This very day. Why? Well, that attack kicked the U.S. war machine into full gear, and we stopped playing on the sidelines. With the U.S. in the war, with all of our resources and our manpower, there was no way that Germany could outlast, outproduce, outfight us. Now, we all know enough history to know that there was a lot of waiting between Pearl Harbor and the final defeat of Hitler. There were desperate battles to be fought, and too many people suffered and died. But in retrospect, having the U.S. enter the war meant doom for those who fought against us. What John is telling us is that in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, the decisive battle with evil has been fought and won. But, and it is a big but, as so often happens in wars, the decisive battle is not the end of a conflict. You know, wars can go on for some time, even when it becomes clear that one side has been defeated. In fact, often the losers become more destructive. What have they got to lose? And follow on with what I read you earlier, John goes on to say, the devil has come down to you with great wrath because he knows his time is short. Well, that's where we live. In between the times when evil has been defeated and God's reign is established. And despite how it may sometimes look, the battle with evil, with pain, with loss, even with death itself, that battle has been won. And there are times when we really do wonder if God is in charge of the world. Violence, war, injustice are far too prevalent. This past week, we've seen people take to the streets to protest injustice. It's far too prevalent. That is part of what it means to live in the waiting time. Those things are still present. It doesn't mean we accept them. It means we have to work against the evil, the injustice, the pain, the suffering. But whatever short-term battles we lose, in the end, peace and justice will triumph. So we live in the waiting time. And yes, we have to go through the valley of the shadow. If there are any shortcuts, any way around that, man, I've never seen it. We go through the dark valleys of life. But we don't go alone. You notice the psalmist ends with the promise, "O Israel, hope in the Lord. For with the Lord there is steadfast love, And with God, there is great power to redeem. That's good news. No matter how bad it gets, no matter how strong evil may appear, there is one who is stronger. And the one who is stronger claims us in our baptism, feeds us for the journey, strengthens us to resist evil, heals us when we're wounded by its power, and at the end, welcomes us into a life where evil has no power. None. None at all. Thanks be to God. Amen.